You know guys, today I'm going to do a good intro. Today we're going to look at chapter 8. Mistakes were made.
Like your birth?
Really?
His whole family is a mistake?
No, starting this project with you was a mistake.
Chapter 8. Mistakes were made. Sweetberry removed the lollipop from her mouth and looked at it in confusion. Rocket Ship Day? She asked. I've never heard of Rocket Ship Day. Me neither. It's a good thing that new Pony told me about it, Pinkie Pie shouted, grabbing some more decorations from the bakery. She stopped in front of the fillies, but the colt was nowhere in sight. Where did he go? The CMC looked around, but CapsLock had already disappeared into the growing crowd of confused onlookers. The mares and stallions looked around in disgust at the decorations now bastardizing their town. They whispered amongst each other about how Pinkie Pie was far from subtle when it came to private affairs. Cookies? Pinkie Pie asked, holding out a tray of rocket chips to some of the town ponies. They declined, pushing the cookies away and looking angrily at the pink mare. Something ain't right here, Appleboom said, taking a cookie from the distraught Pinkie Pie. These don't look any like rocket ships I have ever seen. Skulu, who had actually been enjoying her lollipop, moved it from her mouth and looked at it. If it was smaller, I'd say it looks like... She trailed off. The filly looked up with sudden realization and let the confection fall from her hoof. Pinkie, did that new pony help at all with these decorations? He designed everything, Pinkie Pie shouted cheerfully. But I think you're right, she said, stroking her chin and squinting a balloon. They do look a little... Pinkie Pie, what's the meaning of this? Mayor Mare shouted, pushing through the crowd. Several balloons flew up in her face and she popped them angrily. It's a Pinkie Pie party, Pinkie Pie shouted in response. You think you'd recognize a Pinkie Pie party by now? For what occasion, dare I ask? She asked. Her eyes went wide as she had a rocket ship thrust into her open mouth. It's Rocket Ship Day, Pinkie Pie shouted, releasing more balloons. The mayor removed the lollipop from her mouth and held it up to Pinkie Pie's face. These do not look like rocket ships. Pinkie Pie took a piece of paper from her mane and unfolded it for the mayor to see. I was just going by the design. See, there's a body and this is a fire from takeoff. And does that look like anything else to you? No, that's... No way, no, Pinkie stammered, refusing to believe there was any hidden meaning in the innocent drawing. She looked up to see the crowd was beginning to heckle her. What were you thinking? One mare shouted. This is worse than your party from my father's colonoscopy, an angry stallion shouted. Pinkie looked around at the angry faces, then to her decorations with an awful realization. And just by the way, for everyone who doesn't know what a colonoscopy is, it's basically looking up your anus. So I guess Pinkie Pie produced some nice anus cakes there or something. Let's continue with the story though. You, she shouted, now seeing the vulgar images she'd been too blind to see. She turned to run, but found herself face to shaft with her enormous, unintentionally erotic cake. CapsLock had managed to find his way to the top of the clock tower during the beginning of the celebration. He'd gotten to watch the hilarity unfold from afar, and his laughter could be heard by no pony but himself. Wiping a tear from his eye, he decided it was time for the grand finale. He snagged the cake's donator from Pinkie Pie's before sneaking off, and he pushed his hoof onto the big red button. As Pinkie Pie stared at the massive phallic pastry, it began to shake violently. She could only watch in horror as a jet of white frosting exploded from the tip of the cake. The frosting went straight up and came straight back down, landing in one big glob all over the poor Pinkie pony. The crowd cried out in disgust and began pelting Pinkie Pie with whatever rocket ship paraphernalia they could find. When their rage had finally settled, they dispersed, leaving the town sent in complete disaster. I want this all cleaned up now, the mayor shouted to a lollipop-covered pile of white frosting. The pile stirred slightly in recognition of the demand, and the mayor walked back to her office. The CMC approached the pile cautiously, watching the cake for any more interruptions. Pinkie Pie? Sweetbell asked, poking her hoof at the pile of frosting in the ground. Two sad blue eyes opened up out of the frosting and began crying. "There was supposed to be rocket ships," Pinkie said quietly. "He said it was a rocket ship." "Pinkie, I don't even think Rocket Ship Day is a real holiday," Appleboom said, bending down to look into Pinkie Pie's eyes. "I think CapsLock played a trick on you." "Didn't you, Pony?" Pinkie Pie asked, standing up, still covered with an assortment of her once innocent decorations. "He wouldn't do that, would he?" "Me? No," CapsLock said, approaching the four ponies. He smiled and cut himself a large piece of cake from the rocket's exhaust port. The colt took a big bite, chewed, then spit onto Pinkie Pie. "Okay, maybe I did," he laughed. Pinkie Pie tried to take a step toward the colt, but slipped into the puddle of frosting. CapsLock started laughing even harder when Pinkie Pie came up with the decoration stuck to her face. "What's wrong with you?" Skullo asked angrily, shoving CapsLock. The colt barely managed to keep his balance on the slippery stage. He planted his hooves and turned to the furious Pegasus filly. "You need to chill the fuck out," he said, shoving her back. Before the other members of the CMZ could retaliate, Pinkie Pie pounced onto the colt. Her eyes narrowed and normally puffy mane was completely lank. Bits of frosting slowly dripped from her mane onto CapsLock's face as he looked up in fear. Pinkie Pie breathed heavily, looking down at the terrified colt. She got close to his face, and her eyes twitched as he whispered, "Apologize." CapsLock shifted uncomfortably, unable to look away from the mare's freezing glare. The three fillies cautiously watched and tried not to show their own fear. They'd heard of Pinkie Pie's alter ego Pinkamena before, but they'd no way of knowing just how terrifying it was. Pinkie reached down for one of the lollipops and brought it up to CapsLock's eyes. Both of them stared at the lollipop and Pinkie Pie spoke. "I suggest you apologize, CapsLock," Pinkie said from the corner of her mouth, speaking for the lollipop. "You don't want to upset Pinkie Pie." Her eyes focused back on CapsLock, and she said with a normal voice, "Or she'll hurt you." Her pupils then dilated and moved to the opposite corners of her eyes. A big smile stretched across her face, and she began breathing heavily again. CapsLock in that very moment knew what true fear was. I'm sorry, please don't hurt me," he begged. He started at the lollipop because it was much less imitating than a mare currently striding at them. "Apology accepted," Pinkie Pie said slowly. She brought her hoof downward and pushed the lollipop against CapsLock's lips. Eventually, he had no choice but to let the rocket ship come in from landing. Trolling this pony was a big mistake.
Wow guys, did you notice the professional audio editing? Apology accepted? Wow, that was so good.
"I have seen better, like your mom screaming in her own porno."
You know that implies that you're actually watching pornos.
Yo man, your mic was full messed up, man.
No appreciation of talent.